What's going on, guys, and welcome back. Ravonna Renslayer comes out tonight, and every single cost reduction card has been fired. Will she be following suit, and will she be worth it? We're going to be answering that today. Also, we'll be ranking every single season pass card to come to the game, from Miles Morales to Zabu to Loki, who's been tremendous. We're going to stack them up and see how they all compare. And then lastly, guys, tech cards and their importance. Most best decks have one flex spot, and that tech card matters a lot. So in September, which ones should you be rocking for today's meta? We're going to be talking about that all today and more on this episode of the Snapchat. And as always, I am joined by Mr. Alex Kocha. Hello, man. Happy mid-September, post-Alliath week. We're working our way through fall. How's fall going for you so far? Back to teaching?
It's been a wild week, Cozy. A wild week. I'm glad you tried to distract me with the autumn weather and the autumn beauty, because it's been ugly this week to some degree for some people, because Alliath has been munching people's cards. And it's crazy, because last week we were like, yo, Alliath, like, that card's going to slap. Like, it has potential. We're kind of like humming and hawing about it. Like, is it really going to slap the way we think it's going to? And Cozy, it slaps. It's
funny because it's so split right now. My brother texted me. He's like, I hate this card. I was like, oh, I like it. Like, it's funny. There's differences, I think, on how people view Alliath. And I know one of our subjects, we won't spoil it, but on your side, we'll be talking about, like, villains of Snap. And I think that'll be a fun conversation to break down. Yeah, man, it's been a good fall. I just finished. I'm caught up on Ahsoka, which is, I'm a Star Wars fanboy, so I was enjoying that. And have you seen, are you much of a Disney Plus guy? Have you watched any of those miniseries on Star Wars or Marvel?
I've been rewatching Loki season 1. And I did watch it prior, but now that the cards are out and I'm playing with the cards, like, I didn't realize Alliath was Alliath. Like, it sounds stupid, but like, I'm like, oh, that's the cloud from the cloud, right? Like, it's kind of crazy. I didn't realize it. And then now everything's coming together so much more interesting because of Marvel Snap. And I got to tell you, Loki season 1 is absolutely incredible. I love it.
Yeah, I thought it was the best, probably miniseries that have come out for Disney shows, in my opinion. Like, it was something that I feel like even if you weren't like a Marvel diehard, you would appreciate it just for like the really cool kind of, I don't know, Truman Show vibe, like just weird, like kind of out there, crazy multi-concept stuff. And they took Loki. It's crazy, the arc of Loki, man, going from one of the, like, I don't know, I would say he was like a D-list kind of Marvel loved person even in the MCU, and now like after the show it's like you take that and you just like skyrocket him. So season 2 is coming out next month. Obviously the cards really hyped it up. Kind of wish they did this season next, like to coincide with the kind of weekly show. But yeah, man, if you guys haven't seen Loki, very solid show. You can go check that out. Anyway, man, we've got ourselves obviously a pretty big week with Ravonna, as I've alluded to in the intro. We're gonna obviously break that down. We're going to talk Alliath and villains. What else are we talking about on your side, Alex?
Cozy, we're going to be talking about the new villains of Marvel Snap. These are the cards that are just starting to piss people off, and we're going to be discussing them, their win rates, and their meta shares. We're also going to be talking about whether or not season pass cards should actually be released a little strong. That's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm interested in your thoughts. And finally, we'll be doing the most underrated cards at each cost in Marvel Snap for this month.
Well, man, we had ourselves a good OTA. I thought this OTA was actually more deceivingly impactful than maybe when you first took a look at it there. If you guys haven't seen the OTA, or if you're catching up here on the Snapchat, we had ourselves a nice little buff to Shadow King. We'll definitely break that one down to more extent. He went from a 3/3 to a 2/3. Lady Sif and Black Cat. We have a double whammy for the discard archetype, really helping that out. Spider-Ham getting himself his third adjustment, going back down to a 1-cost card. And then we have a nerf to the Collector. So, Alex, right away, man, what was your kind of like biggest winner, biggest loser from the OTA?
I mean, it's hard to say. I feel like Collector is a huge loser in a weird way, because I still think it's really good in Loki, but to murder the card pretty much in every other archetype feels awful. Like, it feels like it took a stray bullet. So I kind of feel for Collector players, because you even had like Collector-based discard lists with Swarm out there. You had hand-sized Double Dinosaur decks were running Collector. Now those are all just impossible to play.
Yeah, I feel like it was kind of a stray bullet was the right way to put it. Also like a Band-Aid. I would not be surprised if they like fixed the Loki thing in another way, and then Collector goes back. It was a small group of decks that were being played with Collector outside of Loki at the moment. But that doesn't disregard that, it did hurt those decks, where it didn't really hurt the Loki deck, right? Like, all that much. Obviously, Shadow King was the biggest winner, in my opinion. Going down to 2 cost. Do you think he's going to stay a 2 cost? Because right now, it's wild. I mean, it's truly, what a solid card, man.
I actually really like him at 2 costs. And I like this idea that you can at 2 costs tech in specific cards like Luke Cage, Shadow King, Goose. Like there's specific cards that just tech nicely at 2 costs. Removing its buff in Silver Surfer is obviously significant, but at the same time, it's now a 2 cost that can make more sense in more decks. I like it. And I actually thought your Shadow Sarah was actually a really cool deck that utilized to good effectiveness considering what this meta is. So I really like Shadow King. Isn't it crazy, by the way, that wasn't it last week we were talking about how Shadow King was one of my favorite cards of the season, and then it gets buffed? How often does one of your favorite cards get buffed?
I know he was definitely the shock of like, I don't know. I just wasn't expecting him to be getting the buff. There's almost like no reason to not run Luke Cage now as this kind of like, I have a flex spot. What do I do here? Especially if you have like a boosted power deck of any kind. Because if you look at the meta, just, flat line, it's high Evo, and then a good chance Shadow King will be in there to counter the Lokis and the Collector. So like Luke Cage protects you from so much. And you can now do like the late turn Luke Cage to like surprise your opponent and like boost all your numbers back up. And then also having them yourself if you want to run Shadow King. I don't know. Luke Cage is also just becoming a winner, from that Shadow King. But I was surprised, man. What about like the Lady Sif Black Cat? I think Black Cat is going to continue to get better, but I thought it was a fun little change, man.
It's definitely a fun change, and like this has been a few changes in a row. We've had a couple shots to discard over the last couple weeks. Like we had the Blade buff, now Black Cat, and obviously by proximity, Ghost Rider gets some additional love here. And I think that it's key to understand that like you don't want to play Black Cat on turn 3. That was never the point of the card. The point of the card was you discard it, and it's a card that you don't actually have to work towards discarding. So in like traditional Hela, even as a 3/7, there was argument to be had that like, okay, you could even include Black Cat because it's still just a 3/7 and you don't have to work to discard it. But once MODOK came out, there was no point because you just discard everything anyway with MODOK, right?
I have a hot take. I think discard, 2 things on it. First of all, is the most undiscovered archetype at the moment, outside of the MODOK kind of deck that people are gravitating to. The safety that can be played with it now and the reliability is incredible. Like I was doing some reliable Hela decks where like Hela's not this Gamba anymore, but more of this, okay, strategically getting rid of cards and making sure that you use all the targeted discards to your biggest advantage. The stat lines across the board are crazy. Some APOC stuff going on. Ghost Rider is now just honestly pure great stats. I think and I've been testing, I think there's a really good discard deck that will be in the meta at a top competition rate within the next few weeks. It is my personal guess. Definitely by October with some new cards coming. But Black Cat definitely felt like a good card that did hit the OTA, and I like what they did there. Lady Sif, anytime you get an extra bonus point to a card that's always being played, feels good. But I got to be honest, man, I'll talk about him more probably later. But Spider-Ham is he's back, man. As a 1/1, the constant disruption that this guy does for nothing feels fantastic. You don't get a couple of things now with him, as you did the OG one. If you did a Kamar Taj Spider-Ham, you can't have a chance to hit 2 6 costs, and he's less good in that regard. But dude, I'm loving him again.
That's funny that you say that because I'm a little more lukewarm. Like I see why he's better. Like for instance, in like Jane Job based lists, I think he works really well. Like we used to play like 1-drops like Nightcrawler and Iceman just to kind of get things cycling, right? And then so he works really well in those types of lists. And I do like the idea that he's hitting the leftmost card, but like I can't help but feel like I just remember what that OG Spider-Ham was and how overpowered it was. It was so disgusting. It had to get tuned back. But I have a question for you. And this is something that like I don't know if there's a right answer to.
Okay.
But I've been thinking, would it be better or feel better if Spider-Ham hit a random card in the opponent's hand as opposed to the most leftmost?
Yeah, for sure. Because then you could, just play, getting the double proc on him with balance is what would really change it there, right? So the reason I like him though is like, because for me, it's like, I'm trying right now, we're in a very combo-centric meta. Super combo, like each card has so much value into one deck, right? So Iceman and him are such a good 1-drop at the moment because you want to include one of them to mess up the flow. I'm at the point where I'd almost prefer Spider-Ham because you screw a card. It's done. It is absolutely wiped. Whereas Iceman disrupts it a little bit, and I get that. But if it's a Loki, they played a turn later. Collector, same thing. But if I hit their Collector, if I hit the Loki, if I hit whatever it might be, with Spider-Ham, like I have significant advantage and I have the intel. the one power less. In my opinion, man, I love Spider-Ham. I think he's my disruptor now.
That's interesting. Maybe I got to test him a little more and get a better sense of like where he's at now. Like, obviously he's not close to where he was power-wise prior, but to hear you having success with him is pretty unique. Because like I had a bit of an opposite effect. I was like, you know what? I love the card, but I just don't think it's doing it for me. However, what I will say is I think it's a card that's very important to balance with caution, because if this card is overpowered, it is very quickly overbearing what it was prior, right? It's like that leech effect. It is a leech effect, right? And if it gets out of hand, or if it's too strong, like it was prior, then it's going to have a really, really like negative impact on the meta, and specifically in Conquest, where it can be an absolute terror.
This OTA was probably the most surprised I was with some changes. I was like not expecting, I don't know if I called any of them outside of a collector potential adjustment. I was pretty shocked that all these cards were included in some capacity. The Black Cat was nice because I always love when like a really bad card gets some attention, right? Like each OTA where we don't have a strong guy type of card gets some love. It's like, well, that was a missed opportunity. So I was pumped to have Glenn take a focus on some of those cards today. But anyway, solid OTA. Let's get to our first topic, man. Let's talk Ravonna. Now, you know, Eliath, I'm not ready to close that door. I want to talk that, but I know on your new Villains of Marvel Snap, we'll have our good conversation with him. Ravonna Renslayer is one of the bigger question marks, I think, for the community right now at the moment. Again, if you guys don't know what she does, she's a 3/3, and she's going to discount by 1 energy any card that is 1 power and below. And the thing is about her, man, there's never been a bad card that is an energy reduction enabler, right? Like, there's never been a bad one, albeit outside of Zabu with specific forecast. This is probably the lowest pool of these cards, and they're oddly specific. But I want to break down everything. I want to talk about the decks I think she's going to be best in, the specific cards. And of course, Alex, you love talking about like real in-game scenarios. I think it's going to be cool to talk about that with Ravonna. But what I can start out by saying is this will be her best week. Looking at these cards here, and we're going to pull up the entire list. This is not all of them, but looking at these cards, and I'll get the next list up. Let's talk first like a deck that you think is going to be absolute fire with her, and she's going to have that significant impact. And or I want to hear your kind of initial thoughts on her.
For me, it's Patriot right off the bat. Like, how can Patriot not benefit from Ravonna? Like, it's too good. And it might actually allow for a more greedy style of Patriot because of the cost reductions that you're getting in Patriot and Mystique. Silver Samurai not being as popular as it is allows you to hold the Patriot and Mystique later on to the game, which allows you to take advantage of that Ravonna. But most notably, like, listen, we used to have a form of Patriot that actually ran some greedier cards like Abomination and others. And it kind of got cut to be a little bit of a tighter Patriot because of the way the cost structures work. But now when you get that cost reduction on turn 3, you can sneak out Patriot, Mystique, plus a 2-drop on turn 6. It's actually pretty crazy if you think about it. I'm actually all for Patriot with Ravonna. I think it might be one of the most natural deck builds.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it gives you a lot of flexibility because you can play Patriot and Ravonna in a 2-drop, as you just alluded to. You can also just play Patriot and Mystique and have that extra 1 energy on turn 5, which I think is massive because then you don't have to make that decision process. You could play, let's say, a 3-drop like Brood, then Patriot on 5, then Mystique, and then a 4-drop, right? So there's like a lot of kind of flexibility of what you could pull off with the cards, and I do think altogether, this is a great starting point to talk about her. I think she's going to bring a new style of play into 10 plus decks, which is massive, an absolutely massive adjustment. You know exactly what I'm talking about when I say playing down certain cards on certain turns is what Marvel Snap's about. And I think Ravonna is going to dramatically change the strategy on some of these decks. And as you've alluded to, kind of greed. Now we're going to pump the brakes. Let me just ask, like, what do you think? Tier rating 1 through 5 stars, S through F tier. What do you rate her?
You know what? It's so hard. This has been the card that's been hardest to pinpoint. This one in Eliath. Like, I'm telling you right now, Mobius is going to slap, right? We know that. We knew Loki was going to be pretty solid as well. But Loki's still surprised, right? I think that a lot of cards have been surprising lately. So, like, Ravonna has been one where I lean towards like a 3-star. However, depending on the meta conditions, I can see this floating up to 4. Because, like, here's the thing, Patriot's never bad. And, like, I keep saying, okay, like, yeah, it's a Patriot. It's not just Patriot. It benefits on reveal. It benefits so many different lists. So, like, but Patriot is one of the most universally solid decks in Marvel Snap. How the hell is adding Ravonna not a good thing for Patriot?
Yeah, and have we learned nothing about energy reduction at this point? You know what I mean? Like, have we learned nothing? Like, guys, listen, I know it's the hot take to say it's trash. A couple of things. First of all, I'll throw up the image of the Spotlight Week. I mean, who we kidding? The Zabu variant, absolute fire. You know, Jean Grey, she has a bunch of good variants, but the card itself, if you don't have her, and then you get her as kind of this kind of bonus, right? Dude, I took a peek at October Spotlights, right? So Spotlights are all about saving up and looking what's ahead. Man, it's kind of lackluster. There's some cool new cards coming out, but my God, the first few weeks of October, I mean, you got, I believe it's Thanos X23, and I got it here, Echo, right? So cool week, good week, no new card. If you're missing those, be pretty strong, not bad. But then it's kind of the new card man thing, which we're not going to break down October's cards, but Silver Samurai, Lady Deathstrike, I would say passable week. Black Knight, Stature, MODOK, at this point, you've had a lot of chances to get those cards. If you don't have them, great week. If not, it's a pass. And then Kitty Pryde, Phoenix Force in the new card, Silk, Ghost Spider in the new card. To me, if you look at the weeks ahead, I feel like Ravonna will have the biggest impact for the Wild, right? And that's why I have her included in on what is already a cool variant week and as a card that I'm about to break down that I think is going to have significant impact.
It makes me nervous that Mobius is coming out the next week.
Yeah.
Like, we got to be honest, right? Like, Mobius comes out next week and says, no. Whatever cool decks came out, no.
Yeah. And Mobius is going to be very important. And we can't talk about Ravonna and the details about her without mentioning it, right? Mobius is the armor, the Cosmo, to the cost reduction. People were like, well, people aren't going to run Mobius and all that. Yes, they probably are. It's a 2-cost, 3-power card. It may, like someone said to me on the Sarah guide, Mobius is going to cancel this deck. I'm like, yeah, guess what, though? Mobius in the Sarah deck then allows the wave not to counter it. And you just get rid of the biggest counter. Like, Mobius is going to have an impact across the board. But also, that's kind of the nature of the beast. You can't not run On Reveal because you're afraid of Cosmo. You can't not run, Destroy because you're afraid of Armor. He's a much-needed card. And I think he's going to definitely tame the sexiness of Loki and Ravonna because you now have something that can immediately kind of go against you. And then all of a sudden you lose that advantage that you once had by playing Loki or whatever it might be. However, listen, I get it's going to affect her as a card. I'm just standing by. I think she's going to be pretty solid for the game. So I want to talk about exactly why. Now, quickly, I will say this, dude. If you do spend on Marvel Snap, I think it's important to say this. For whatever reason, if you do buy bundles and things like that, there is a Mobius bundle coming out as well, which is the first time we've really ever seen that. You get the Jet Ski Owen Wilson variant, too, for what it's worth. So you can technically just flat out get Mobius by getting that, right? So if you do that, it's something to take into consideration if you want to go after Ravonna here. And they're both Series 4, so maybe if you don't want the Zabu Spotlight and you don't really care about Zabu, then it may be just worth going with the collector tokens. And then you get to do the weekend mission, right? And have some kickback there. When it comes to Ravonna, Alex, yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to give her a 4-star just because I think she will shift the meta game, even with Mobius later on down the line, right? So the month's December, and we've got these decks like Patriot that are now going to be slotting her in. But I'm glad you brought up Patriot because I think that'll be very solid for her. There's one deck in particular that I think is flirting with Tier 1, flirting with an S-tier deck, and now it'll probably be a very solid at that, Tier 1 deck. And Alex, do you have a guess? You have a guess what that is?
Is it going to be something with Zola?
Dude, that's a good guess. And we have Zola to talk about for sure. It's Cerebro 3, man.
I could have known it was Cerebro. Damn it, I knew it. As soon as I said Zola, I'm like, he's going to bring up a Cerebro picture.
Listen, man, Cerebro 3, I think, it's been on the cusp. It's already so good, man. Because if you think about the 3-cost cards, it gets bananas once you start looking at all the 3-cost cards. This is going to propel this deck so forward. Because even if you have Mobius, if they have Perfect Draw, right, sure, they shut you down a little bit. But it's not like the deck was already doing bad, right? So then you have all of a sudden now this 3-cost card that is going to get, or 3-power card that's going to get itself the bonus either way. So just pure value inside of that list. even if you can't get this combo off. But if you can get Ravonna off, the next turn you technically could pull off a Cerebro Mystique play, which is bananas to think about. But also, all the cards that have 3 power, there's a lot of those that are just going to be impacted immediately by Ravonna and the different combos that you can pull off. Dude, I'm thinking Cerebro 3, this is going to be its time, and it'll be our last topic, but that means tech cards. We might see a return of Enchantress and Rogue pretty heavily. Like, Alex, let me just show you the sheer amount of cards just to bring up the ones that work with C3, right? It's kind of crazy even if Enchantress gets big, because you have like Invisible Woman to take the blow. You have Scarlet Witch. You have Sentinel. You have got Shadow King, which actually was a major buff to C3 because now he's even cheaper to get out there. This is the deck I think she'll impact the most.
It's actually wild to think that like Cerebro is legitimately getting competitive, and it's shown in the last couple of weeks that it can win games. It can, I think it floated to the top of the leaderboard at one point. So like it's pretty neat to see C3 doing what it's doing, and it's an archetype that's only going to get better as more cards get released, right? Like as more cards, more options are kind of added to the game for C3. We even see like C5 experimentation, but it's not nearly as competitive in my opinion as C3. So you're right, and the Shadow King, it's a huge buff.
I just think it's crazy that you can pump out all this power with Cerebro and doing the C3 tech, and then Shadow King and Shang-Chi both respond with counter power, right? Immediately, and they build your deck. Like, to me, that's what's kind of crazy with the whole deck and why it's different than, let's say, C2. C5 has some of that now, like a lie. There's some fun things you can do there, but I think this is going to be naturally now a competitive deck, which you're going to have to accept. OTAs happen. It kind of shifts these cards ins and out, and it can mess all that up. Those are the obvious decks, Alex. Let's take a look at the cards that are going to be getting adjusted as well. And if we take a look, there's a couple play lines that I want to go ahead and focus on for some cards, right? First of all, I think without a shadow of a doubt, we've got ourselves Mystique down there, which is why we've talked about Patriot. But the fact of being able to play Iron Man and Mystique, I think is an actual play line that is beyond legit to have access to in every deck that runs Ravonna, Mystique, and Iron Man. Every single deck allows you to have a double power point in that location change for 2 locations. To me, that's nutty. I mean, to me, like, that is where the deck building gets really opened up. It's the greediest combo. You have to wait for turn 6.
It's probably the ultimate combo, honestly. Like the idea of being able to play a 4-cost Iron Man and a 2-cost Mystique, doubling the power of 2 locations, like especially since I think the metagame is shifting towards much more impactful early turns. So the more power you place onto the board on the earlier turns, the more that gets doubled when you play a turn 6 Iron Man Mystique combo. So I love the call, and it definitely is going to be a terrifying combo. And even then, like, what do you even do? Like, you can't even run Enchantress. Like, even if you skip the initiative and stuff like that, like, what, you're going to guess on one of them? They're still going to be hitting 2 locations on turn 6. So it's pretty crazy how, like, defensible the play is as well.
What are some cards on here that you think are, even just for that 1 less power, if you can get it off on turn 4 or on turn 5, is going to have just that significant impact? Whereas it doesn't matter if Mobius comes down later because you already got what you want done.
There's 2 that have really stood out to me while kind of like researching Ravonna. The first are going to be the Goblin pairs, specifically Hobgoblin. Playing Goblin on turn 4 without the need of a Daredevil or anything like that, I think you can much more confidently slide it into a location because, you know, it's much less likely on turn 4 that they completely bombard or blockade a specific location, which I think is cool. But also, like, as you mentioned, the entire on reveal archetype really gets a lot of love here. I mean, you get Wolfsbane, Ironheart, Forge. I mean, these are all cards that benefit. And then you have discard as well that gets the Morbius and Dracula down to 3 costs as well, which could open up some shenanigans for later turns, because now Dracula's a 3 cost, might provide you with opportunities to approach turn 6 differently instead of having to just always rely on Chavez as a turn 6 play, discard Apocalypse or whatever. You might be able to do something a little crazier if you're playing your Dracula on turn 6 while holding the Apocalypse in hand, right? So I really like what those decks might look like, and Ravonna really helps some of these cards with really high impact abilities sneak out onto the board, both either cheaper or in later turns in combinations with other cards.
I just think there's a lot of hidden combos. This is why I think she's a home run hit. Even having cards like we've already mentioned, the Forge, the Arnim Zola, these more dependable options, The other archetype I want to talk about when we look at all this is Mr. Negative. So I think a lot of people might look at this and say, well, she's an obvious in Mr. Negative. We saw with Zabu, some people don't prefer to play Zabu and Psylocke because there's kind of this weird, like, okay, but then you putting another card that isn't benefiting from the flip, right? That's the con of playing them. However, Alex, dude, I was looking at it more closely. Look at some of these other cards you can compound with Mr. Negative. That's not just discounting him, right? I think that's the important thing. Not just discounting him, but at this point, yes, Ravonna has to be played on 3. So all of a sudden you're not going to be able to play him down early. It's not exactly that. It's a nice, kind of default option if you don't get Zabu, but it's more of Adam Warlock can be played to get more draw for only 1 cost. If we keep looking, Psylocke, as we just mentioned too, Ironheart, who these are going to get flipped, but they work. They do work. Now, will you want to play her over something like Bast, when in reality, that's such a great combination as well? I'm not sure, but I do think Mr. Negative is another archetype that could get some serious benefit that already run the majority of these cards because they naturally have less than 1 power.
I think the comparison here is going to be the current Loki deck, and hear me out. Loki is often designed in a way where it has a second option, a second line in the event that Loki's not drawn. Mr. Negative has never had that. Mr. Negative has always been in a situation where if you don't draw negative, you lose. If you do draw negative, hopefully they don't retreat and you just slap them for 8 cubes, right? That's basically how it works. Ravonna might make a Mr. Negative deck less risky with an additional line for victory. I think that's pretty interesting because I don't know about you, but every time I play Mr. Negative, it's on the bottom of my deck.
Yeah.
Literally every single time.
Yep.
And I've been very vocal about me not liking Mr. Negative decks for that exact reason. I never draw them. I just don't. I'm the cube donator when I'm playing Mr. Negative. However, with Ravonna, there's the potential to design decks that have 2 lines. You have the Mr. Negative line and you have the Ravonna line. And while there could be an argument to say like sometimes that's just a deck that lacks identity, right? I think there's something to be said about that because sometimes you want a deck that just does the thing it's designed to do really, really well.
There's cards in the game like Zabu. When they're specific to numbers, it means all of a sudden they're future proof. And I think that's an important thing to remember. Anything now that comes out that's going to be a strong card because it doesn't have too much power is immediately going to work with Ravonna. I think it's kind of a no-brainer in my opinion, but it also depends where you're at, what you spin, what you don't have. If you don't have Zabu, don't even think about it. Just go right in and with eyes closed. This is a banger week. But if you do, it's going to feel pretty damn good to get this card. I think she's going to be a lot of fun. Although she might struggle a bit more with Mobius, but give her time. I think it'll take more time than you think to get the optimal decks out. You're not going to see the day one YouTubers. This is the best Ravonna deck. Because it won't be. I think it's going to take a little time because we've got a lot of synergy, man, with this card.
You're absolutely right. I want to just end on this point. I said prior, probably a 2 to 3 star, 3-star card, but that is during this launch phase, Mobius phase. Once Mobius's popularity starts to wane a little bit, which it will, because everyone's going to stop playing with the new hotness and new cards come out, you're going to see Ravonna being a 4-star card. I do certainly believe that because it is, as you said, every single card that's released within its scope is going to make that card better. And over time, you're going to find a list that absolutely bangs, and Ravonna is going to be a major part of it. So I think that the future for Ravonna is really bright. I'm just kind of sad that it's like it gets 1 week before like the big hammer comes down on it, but the future's bright. There's no question about it. I think this card's going to slap overall in the long term.
Well, it's funny because it's going to do this, then this, right? Because Mobius will be played more that week than ever. Just like every week we've seen these cards come out, and it's going to have this dramatic Ravonna sucks, and then it's going to even out when, the new season pass comes and da-da-da-da. It's stay patient. I think Ravonna will be worth it in the long run personally, and I'm willing to eat that if it's not, but it's a card that shows a lot of promise in my book. Let's go ahead and move the page. Let's go forward, buddy. We got our next topic at hand, and I thought it would be fun. We've done this in the Snapchat before, but I thought it would be fun to look back. We've got Loki, who's tremendous as a season pass card. But I want to go now and talk about the past season cards, the past season pass cards, and rank them. So I want to take a look at when they came out. How effective were they? How effective are they still today? And we're going to be comparing them against each other, right? So S tier, or let's say a C tier on this list, may not be a C tier card overall, but in the scope of season pass cards, that might be where it belongs. I feel like for the most part, there's probably only been 2 seasons that have felt like a miss. maybe 3. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, the majority of these season pass cards have been pretty impactful, and the ones that haven't been, I feel like you felt it on the meta. Like you felt like nothing really happened here this month, and that kind of feels bad. Yeah, I'm actually really interested in this conversation, and specifically how far some of them have come, because some of them went from completely irrelevant to being major staple cards today.
So here it is. This is our SABCDF. If you're listening on the podcast, I will be obviously shouting out where we are going to place each one, and we're going to start all the way back prior to the launch. And so some of you guys may not know this, some of you guys might, that these cards, they came out as season pass cards, right? And we start with Wave, which was a season pass card, Alex. And, I think we could be quicker on this one, right? Regardless of the meta. I remember those that didn't start on the Wave season pass was at such a significant disadvantage because of how card acquisition used to be.
Yeah, that's me. That's me. Literally, I started the game immediately as the season pass ended for Wave, and I got invited to the beta and all this stuff, and then like the season pass ended and the new one began. I never got a chance to grab Wave. And I was like, what's the big deal? And I'm like, wait a minute, Death Wave. It was one of the most impactful season passes of basically all season passes, and I missed it. And I was one of the first players to play this game, but I wasn't the first apparently. So I was so sad. But you're right. And the old method of card acquisition was so painful compared to what we have now. We complained, but my God, it was so much worse before. And I didn't see Wave till like literally months after. So I finally pulled it out in my Pool 3 shenanigans. But yeah, it's S tier card. It's always been. It probably always will be. This card's unbelievable.
I just love it, man. It's so fun. It's such a fun card. And the fact that Mobius is going to be able to be the only thing that can truly turn the off switch on Wave is wild. I think that's going to be wild times we'll be living in. So Wave, we're going to go through quickly on some of the obvious ones. Thor was our next season pass card. He was a 4 cost when he came out. Was actually pretty trash. He had more power, but he was trash because you didn't have a lot of turns to get his Mjolnir to power him up. And then we have Thor today that I think is a Jane Jaw card, right? Like that's his main purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the only place he's really played in Jane Jaw. Yeah, it's pretty much the only place he gets played. But he's good there. He's really good there. He's a staple to that deck.
Where do you have him? Against other season pass cards.
I would give him a C, honestly. I lean towards C.
Yeah, I think C and maybe even D. Not that I don't love Thor, but like in comparison to the impact of like what you would be able to do with him in decks, I would even lean D just because of like you would be restricted. If Thor came out as a season pass card today, I think he'd be pretty hated because I think he'd have like one niche and then people would just Cosmo it, if it was like super popular. That's my personal opinion, but it is Thor. I'll settle for your C placement. That's fine. Next up, we have Daredevil, which I think was obviously a massive card to come to Marvel Snap for a long time. Served a very healthy role. I would say up until Jeff came out, one of the best cards in the game. Where do you have Daredevil on your list?
Daredevil, I mean, for him, he used to be an A for me. I would lean high B, but I'm comfortable in the A category for him, for sure.
Oh yeah, just for me, the weight that he had the entire time he came out, he's still good today. It's not like he's bad by any means. I think he was S tier all the way up. Now he's he's an A B tier card that you just don't include as much. Again, because of the way Jeff works and because of the way Professor X is being played nowadays with these Storm High Evo decks, I think he's a no doubt A, dude.
He's definitely great. I just think that there's so many competitive 2-drops, right? That aren't necessarily season pass cards that have caused him to get cut. Because like the most difficult part of Marvel Snap is the 12 card deck part, right? And there are occasions where Daredevil's getting cut. And even in like the Thanos control, like he was being cut because you play the Professor X on turn 4. Like, you know what I mean? Or like you'd play the Prof S early, so the Daredevil wasn't actually necessary all the time. So I found him getting cut more often, and that's why I leaned towards like low A, high B, but he's definitely one of my favorite cards in the game. And fun fact for those that recently just started playing Marvel Snap, he used to make the whole screen go red, which made it impossible to actually see what the hell was going on.
Bro, imagine him coming out today, though. I like to imagine some of these cards launching as season pass. This guy would be hyped through the moon. Like, this guy would be all over the YouTube, the shock faces, I can't believe this is a season pass card because his effect is that dramatic. I do feel like we have kind of thrown him by the wayside or just how cards are being played out with 5 and 6 cost cards, just how the way it's all working together. But his effect is legendary, man. Absolutely legendary. Now next up we've got, believe it or not, Nick Fury season pass card. Woof. Nick Fury. Now he was trash up until what, July? June? Was it June he got adjusted?
Yeah, recently, like, he was just hot garbage on release. I feel like I was one of the only believers in Nick Fury, and even then, I was lying to myself.
You were the only believer because there was none. Yeah, he was definitely just not great at value. Wasn't worth using. And now good. A good card. A card that I like to use. But still is getting slotted out in the most premium lists. Man, if you take all of it into consideration, where do you have Nick Fury? I think Thor, by the way, needs to go in D tier.
I was just gonna say,
weird,
I was gonna say if Thor is D, Nick Fury is gonna be like just with him, or C, right? Because I'm thinking about, like, Nick Fury's better than Thor right now, isn't he?
Yeah, of all time, I'm gonna put like, if we're taking in consideration all this and pair it up with each other. Honestly, as a season pass card, bro, Nick Fury would be an F tier, man. If you think about how long it took him to be relevant too, I love Nick, I love the card right now. He's great, but it took him a year to be good. As a season pass card, I give Nick Fury an F, and that sucks.
I would accept D because he's good now though. He's playable now, but he was pretty awful before.
But if you can, you gotta weigh him all together as a season pass card and how long it took him to be good. When he came out, it took him. Dude, you had a dead season card. You had a dead card. Imagine, like, I don't know, Phoenix Force being dead for 10 months.
It's true. It's true.
It's rough. It was a different world of Marvel Snap. But it's crazy that it took as long as it did.
I'm willing to put him in F for now. And maybe we change our... I mean, listen, this is not a scripted discussion, right? We're going to make some changes if necessary.
Agreed.
Okay, let's go F. Let's go F because I like what you're saying. You're talking about, like, the entire history of the card as a season pass card.
Yes.
Nick Fury has a lot of history, and a lot of it it's dog shit. So
yeah, it's weighing all these things. Right. Weighing all these things together, right? And that's where I put him. So then we enter launch, right? So the launch of the game happens. Miles Morales comes out, which is an interesting card to come out for, like, Move, which was trash until Pool 3, still trash. So, like, interesting. But then we have him today in the Silky Smooth decks and how he works together. And again, looking at him as a pure season pass card. Where do you have him?
As a pure season pass card, he's probably a C because he was, like Nick Fury, kind of irrelevant for a while, but now he's an important cog in a lot of decks. Like, he's actually legit in a lot of decks right now. Yes, it's the Move archetype. Yes, it's the Silky Smooth archetype, but those are well, not Move, but Silky Smooth. Like, last time I checked, it's like a 59% win rate, even after the nerfs to Captain Marvel. Like, this deck still slaps, and Miles Morales is a huge component of it.
And I think that the metagame, the way we process Snap and value and all those kind of things, right? Miles would have been played earlier than he was, even back then, if people put the weight to a 1-5 to what it was, right? Like the emergence of Shang-Chi in every day. All these things taken into consideration, I feel like C is probably a good spot for him as well. Black Panther, up there as one of the more hyped ones because on reveal was all the rage. It's fun to look back at this. All the rage. The movie just came out. Double power, man. We were having people put 2 billion power on the board. It's so cool to see. Where do you have Black Panther as a season pass card? Because I feel like he's a tough one. He's a tough one to rank.
I feel like this was one of the first cards that you and I really disagreed on, by the way. Didn't I come in saying this card was complete filth and you were really high on it? And then in my defense, it didn't do much for a while. And it only really started coming on when people started truly figuring out natural ways to put it in decks. Not just I'm going to Black Panther Zola every game and make it super obvious. I think that it has had a resurgence in a big degree. When you look at the whole history, I think it leans C, but ultimately, I think this card is towards B. Could even touch A, but for Season Pass, I think it's a strong B.
There's not a lot of cards. I think I would never give it an A. There's just not a lot of cards, though, that can win you the game just by playing that and one other card, right? And that's what he did. And there wasn't a lot of answers to it back then. And what's so cool about him is when he doubles, he goes to an 8. So he's under the Shang-Chi, and then he can be used to go over. The 5 cost has always been his kind of hurdle. Man, I like him. I do. I think I would put him either kind of Miles zone, in C or lower B. By the way, these are not in the order from top to bottom. This is just where we have them here. So we have one officially in every category, Nick Fury and F, and everybody across over there. Fun stuff. I think people might disagree on Black Panther's placement, but dude, build an on reveal list and don't have them in it. It feels weird. Next season.
Yeah, but what do you think they disagree on? Like, I'm curious about that. What do you think they're disagreeing on?
Just their usage of them. I think that they might have them in C. I think just like
yeah, that's kind of okay. I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but like I think that it's okay to have a recency slant here. I think that Black Panther works in a lot of lists.
He was
I think
good before that too. He was good before that. I think that again when he came out, it's like any freaking card coming out. Everybody knew Black Panther were in these decks, so they just ran Cosmo, and then they're like, this card sucks, and then then we get like I don't know our next card we're gonna talk about in Silver Surfer, and then they forget about him, and then you can Arnim Zola again, right? So like the reason I agree, I don't know. I can see some comments here. I'm gonna be excited to see them. Silver Surfer, let's not waste time, man. I think now, then, in the future, can we just say an S tier card, buddy?
Easy S tier.
Yeah, and we're gonna just lean into Zabu. Let's just put them both there. But for fun's sake, let's just talk about for those that got into Marvel Snap late, right? What did Silver Surfer launch at, Alex?
Yeah, it was a 3-0. And it absolutely slapped because it gave 3+ power across the board. You thought Brood was bad now?
Dude.
You thought Brood was bad now? Brood was straight up oppressive back then. And just everything was. I can't believe it lasted as long as it did. Like, okay, in the modern era of Snap, Silver Surfer gets nerfed in like a week and a half.
Sarah Surfer negative and Sarah Surfer were so. I remember seeing a Brood and I'd be like, well, that lane's dead. Like, it wasn't even maybe I can win it. It's like, dead lane. It's done. I lost. And then, like, what was crazy is he came out right when all the series cards came out. So you had, like, Absorbing Man and Bass, like, sneaking in there in these lists because, like, not a lot of people had them. And, like, dude, it was pure chaos, Agent of Chaos. Zabu was even... Somebody must have been hammered after New Year's Eve to the Zabu check. Because Zabu discounted forecast by -2. And it was a brutal month of Snap.
It was brutal. It was absolutely ridiculous. The Absorbing Man Spider-Man combos that at the time where he actually like blocked the lane off was so depressing. I guess I won't play this video game, right? It was absolutely brutal. But you know what? Honestly, let's give Second Dinner some credit here. Very elegant nerf, if not one of the most elegant nerfs they've ever done.
Oh, the best
to an
nerf.
overpowered card.
The best nerf they've done because they handled the two most purchased, probably season pass cards, and made sure they didn't suck. And made sure, it's funny, like when Kitty Pryde got nerfed, she was like, everyone was like, I can't believe it. And then, like, look at what she did, right? And then they had a fixer, in fact, because people remember what they were, but just because they're not where they were doesn't mean they weren't bad. We might even see this with Loki in the future, right? February, MODOK, man. It's a tough one. MODOK, where do you place him?
For me, I would put him in A, and I'll tell you why. That's high. That's high. But I'll tell you why he's an A. Yeah. He's an A because nothing does for discard what MODOK does. You cannot functionally play discard without MODOK right now. There are some lists floating around that are trying some like Hell Cow and like discard stuff with the Black Cat and Ghost Rider. Like, I get it, but MODOK is such a vital component to discard. It is essential if you're a discard player. I think it's A simply because it's good. It's still 8 power, which is not insignificant. And it does something for an archetype that just lifts it from like the ashes. Like discard without MODOK doesn't feel like discard anymore. It feels like RNG. It feels like just a gamble festival.
I think he's an easy A, like an easy A, right? Because think about it. If you were running the reliable discard back in February, like when no one was playing it, because that got popular in late April. If you were you had an infinite season for like 7 seasons because that deck was that good for that long, and it's still good today, right? So agreed. I think he's an A tier. He's had his worth. He's had his lastness. Love the card. Nimrod, which is controversial, came out very lackluster, then was great, then now is awesome, right? So I think he's a tougher one to rank because of recency. We want to just say, oh, he's a great card. I would say probably average as a B, though.
It's hard. When he came out, he was on a D side, maybe even F. But there was also like Leech. That was like the heyday of Leech, which was destroying like a lot of his combo plays because like you would basically play Nimrod on 5 and then Leech would just hit you 90% of the games. So you couldn't even do anything. So Nimrod had a bad meta around it, like a really bad meta. Similar to like when like we joke about how Jean Grey came out at the wrong time with Bounce. Nimrod came out at the wrong time too. However, what I will say is when I'm chilling and I want to lay back and play some Marvel Snap, Shuri Nimrod Destroyer 456 all day long. That's what I'll
It's
play all day long. I wouldn't have to think. I'm not even doing the math. I'm just throwing cards down. I'm just throwing cards down and I'm letting them bounce around and I'm winning games. I actually really like Nimrod. If you think it lands B, I'll accept it. It feels like an A right now, but it was a D back then, Cozy.
and it took a while too. That's why I averaged it out. To me, because of the whole F up on the Kitty Pryde situation, she always just kind of felt like the season pass card, and Nimrod was just kind of like existing. I just think it was a miss having him as the featured card to begin with, and I think they probably looking back would realize the same now that they've seen the impact of what Kitty Pryde has done altogether. Pretty whiff of a season too, looking back at like Negasonic and Wolf. I forgot that he was right after Nimrod, but Hitmonkey came out, who in data mines was like scary. He was looking scary because he was insanely good. Hitmonkey was absolutely everywhere. In fact, I think they nerfed him way too hard. It's sad. He's still fine, but it's sad to see what he's come to. And now that Shadow King's a freaking 2 cost, they need to bring him back because now you have a direct answer to close everything they just did with Hitmonkey. In my opinion, it's disgusting what they've done to Hitmonkey. Taking all things into consideration and how long he lasted, where do you have him?
This one's hard because this was like an S tier card. It was an S tier card. I don't care what anyone says. Like it was putting up insane points on turn 6 and the best archetype in Marvel Snap. And then now it feels like it's getting cut. Like your Shadow Sarah deck was like one of the first times I've seen Hitmonkey featured in a legitimate deck in a long time.
Yeah.
Like think about it, this card died essentially. Even in bounce, like in tournament play, people were not playing Hitmonkey in bounceless. I was like, what is even happening now? Like they were cutting him. So like he went from an S to basically a D, right? And if you want to say he's a B or C, I would accept it overall. Like his highs were so high. So I think that carries him past C. So I'd accept the B placement. But you're right. Like I think that they need to consider doing something with Hitmonkey now. Specifically, the Shadow King is now in a mix as a tech card at 2 cost.
I hope to see him in the next OTA. Man, if you listen to Second Dinner, throw some consideration of the monkey's way. Nebula, man. Nebula, kind of always that card that has always been good, right? Always did her role. Kitty Pryde, everybody got for free. So that kind of like slowed her down a bit from her Rocket month. But still is in every like top end list today, right? Like just play Nebula out. I think I have Nebula for an A. I think an A feels pretty good.
I felt like I was just going to have to sell you on her being an A. I agree it's an A. I feel like I'm one of the highest on Nebula because like people don't see Nebula as a control card, but it is.
Yep.
I don't care what anyone says. It's a control card.
Yep.
It's almost like Jean Grey without force or for punishing them without playing there. It's like, hey, this is basically Jean Grey light, except if you don't play there, I'm just getting power and I don't care.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I was doing a turn by turn for my high Evo deck, and I was explaining why you want her first over like Sunspot because then you're forcing where they need to go. Like you immediately get a little bit of leverage because you know what they have to do, and that with location reveals can really pay off over time. So yep, love the A placement. Ghost Spider is one that listen. It's not that she doesn't help move a lot. It's not that she was not very impactful, and I think she's underplayed still to this day. I have her for D. I think I'm going to put her in the D tier.
I accept that. Like, it's probably an F in popularity wise, but I think this card is way better than people give it credit for. At 1 drop, it's insane. There's so many combination plays you can do. I think it's basically that the move archetype outside of like the one specific move deck is just kind of dead in the water. Like traditional move, like Heimdall move and stuff like that, even Vulture to some degree, like those style decks aren't really a thing anymore. It's the Kraven, the Silks, and that's the play style that Ghost Spider doesn't really excel in, right? So like, what do? You could you just Ghost Spider someone into a Kraven lane, but then that's 2 slots taken. That's not what you want. So yeah. Ghost Spider, I think, is a victim of the move meta, but a way better card than we're giving it credit for.
Phoenix Force, the fastest adjustment we've ever seen on a card by a mile. Another card that I do think is underplayed. That isn't the best thing. I think I'm going to still give its average at as D, even though C is where I see it over time. It's tough because I actually am kind of on the Phoenix Force train of loving the card a lot. And I think you could do some wacky things with it. Yeah, I'm going to give it a D.
It's a card that, like, honestly, when someone pulls off the Phoenix Force multiple man combo on me, I'm like, I'm just retreating. I'm not dealing with this.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, right.
you get the win. You get it. I'm leaving. Bye-bye, right? I just not like it's good when you get that combo. It's good, but when you don't get that combo and it doesn't quite work for you, it feels like a bit of a dead card. But it's a very combo centric card. Doesn't surprise me that you like it then. But yeah, Phoenix Force I think at D is an appropriate placement.
Dokken, where do you have Dawkin, a card that had a lot of hype. I think living up to the hype, he fell flat, but still a good card. Yeah, would you agree that he's in between these two?
I would lean B
I would
over
too.
C. I think he's good. Like, I don't think he's C. I think he's good. If anything, I actually think he's being underappreciated. Like, he's a very consistent 3/8, and we used to play Maximus very consistently, and that's a way bigger downside than Dakin. So yeah, if you think like 3/8's bad, then I don't know what you think is good. Like 3/8 is good. So I'll take it. It's always 3/8. Let's be honest. Ain't nobody not getting that shard down or
most of the
destroyed
time.
with
It's
this
tough
card.
not to, man. You have a million things working for you. And then obviously we could just throw in Loki into the S tier, the newest season, just a phenomenal card. Well, the one thing we got to get to our last subject that we'll have on a shorter time limit today, but the one thing you do looking at this is it's cool to kind of see the bell curve outside of possibly the C tier, which we could arguably put 1 or 2 cards in there. They've done a pretty good job. They've done it, especially since launch, of making these cards unique, special, not over the top, but good cards, especially looking at our S list. I actually think we nailed this ranking here.
I like it too. I like it too. The one that sticks out to me is like I worry about my Black Panther comments. I feel like it could be higher. I disagree with anyone that says Black Panther should be lower. Like, I think the card's way better. Like, I've really grown to like Black Panther. It's the one that I'm staring at. I'm like, Black Panther's not a B today. He's not a B today, but like I get the scope of it, but he was always kind of good. Has he been changed? No, he's been consistent the entire time.
It's been the same. Yeah, I think Miles
It's just
Morales will
Zola
get
existed.
back.
Like, the key combo pieces were all there. Maybe just like the decks weren't there yet. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like Black Panther's always been better than maybe I realized or we realized, or like, you see what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
isn't Black Panther low on this list? No.
Yeah, I think it's tough when comparing them to each other. I kind of like him where he's at. I don't know if I would fudge with a lot of these. Dawkin is tough in his playability right now, and I feel like we're convincing ourselves, even though he's good, I just feel like he's not being played, right? And I think Ghost Spider people would have in the F tier because of just a popularity contest for some of these cards. But overall, let us know in the comments down below, and if you're listening on the podcast, shout it out to the Void. Let's go to our last subject, which we are going to be a bit quicker on, but I wanted to touch on this after the Shadow King buff. If you look at the meta decks across Snap right now, Alex, there's one kind of spot in Loki, one spot in High Evo. All these decks have one spot for a tech card. Right now, we're seeing Shang-Chi exit out a little bit. Shadow King is, in my opinion, the premier tech card at the moment. He comes with some cons, I guess, but would you have him at the number 1 slot?
Shadow King right now is the most playable tech card, I think, for sure. And he's still tricky. Like, there's going to be times where, like, it's like you got to hold him late. But like he eats Shuri decks. He just does so well against so many different decks. I love playing him on Cravens. I love playing him on Angelas. And often he's taking people by surprise. I don't care what anyone says. No one's accounting for a Shadow King play. Yeah, I think Shadow King's great, and I think the buff to him is pretty significant because at 2 costs, you can slide him into so many different lists. Like, Shang-Chi's a 4. So that's kind of the reason why I think people start to move away, because you're seeing a reduction in play of Zabu. So the 4 cost plus Shang-Chi play on turn 6 isn't nearly as common anymore. Mobius is coming out, so that's going to be even harder to pull off. So Shang-Chi's getting his ceiling kind of pushed down a little bit, and it makes more room for some other tech cards, like the newly buffed Shadow King.
If you could have, if it wasn't Shadow King, you have 1 spot available, who's the next one going in your deck?
It's Luke Cage for me. It has to be Luke Cage. I don't care what anyone says. I think that it's our fault. We've been talking about how Evo's being slept on for weeks, and it has been. It was like a 1.5% meta share 3 weeks ago. Now it's pushing 7%, 6%. And I think that Luke Cage is a pretty confident add-on in a lot of decks right now from a tech perspective, not just for locations, but it absolutely eats High Evo's lunch, and I think that's important.
Yeah, if it wasn't Luke Cage, to me, I can't. I'm puzzled by it. I can't understand it. Hopefully, the Rise of C3 continues to make it go up. To me, Cosmo is the most disrespected tech card in the game right now. Listen, if you look at those top decks, this answers a good amount of those problems. You can shut down Loki, Agent Coulson, and all their card gain and what they want to try to do there to get a significant card advantage on you. Just Hella Tribunal alone, you don't have to worry about that BS, right? Like, that exists and it's out there. You don't have to worry about that. And it's just answering and responding to Galactus, to Eliath. He's the one that I'm running in my Loki decks and High Evo decks. I have him in both, funny enough. Because then, if you look at Luke Cage, yeah, he's cheaper. And I trust me, man, you don't have to tell me on Luke Cage. But in High Evo, the reason I have him in there, instead of, let's say, my own Luke Cage, is that I can throw him on as well onto my Sunspot lane and Nebula lane to protect them from the Shadow King, right? So he also does the job of protecting the cards that you want to protect. He helps Shuri list, trying to protect something that you've played down that's pretty big. And just Galactus. Galactus is everywhere. And this, in my opinion, don't worry about matching the power. Get the priority. Throw him down. That's why I have him so high. And then I think we can both agree Shang-Chi would naturally fall up next, yeah.
I love what you're saying about Cosmo. It's a definite underappreciated element of it. A lot of people see Cosmo as a defensive play, but could also be used offensively in a sense, like obviously against Galactus. But the way I like to use it is I don't build a Devil Dinosaur deck without Cosmo, because if you drop a Devil Dinosaur on turn 5, you are begging for it to get punched the hell out. And so what you're able to do is you play that Cosmo knowing that that's where my Devil Dinosaur is going, so that I can play Mystique confidently in another location, knowing that that Devil Dinosaur is going to survive. It fights through Enchantress, it fights through Shang-Chi. So like, I like what you're saying there about how people are kind of sleeping on Cosmo. And it's funny because there was a time where it was by far the most hated card in the game. People were saying, gotta nerf Cosmo, get rid of it. Then we were saying, and then I remember the development team saying, no, like we got a card coming, which ultimately was Echo. The only card that really interacts with it on turn 6 is Magneto. But ultimately, I really do like what it does for the game. I think what keeps it in check is its double effect, like the fact that it impacts the player who's playing it. It's a higher skill cap card that people give it credit for, because you can screw yourself. You can be like, well, I put Cosmo in the wrong spot and now I can't play anything. Because especially when your opponent is playing Storm and restricting maybe your play, that Cosmo sitting in a location might be a disaster for you. So I get why people are a little more hesitant, but its impact is legitimately one of the highest impact cards in the game.
Listen, the rise and fall of the meta extremely impacts these next cards here, and we'll wrap it up with this. Right now, ongoing isn't all that crazy. What I love about Ravonna is she's going to bring back Patriot, this Mystique, and Iron Man play. Mobius is an ongoing effect. And so even if you get Mobius, you can have Ravonna, you could play Enchantress, and then it still opens up your Iron Man Mystique play if you so want to, right? I think because of the rise of ongoing, she's coming back. She's coming back with her 5 power. Definitely don't sleep on her. But yeah, I think we covered the top 3 at the moment. With Shang-Chi still being Shang-Chi, man, still feels great to have in these decks, still doing what he does best. And if C3 truly goes through the next level, he's definitely going to be included in that as well. Alex, we've got a lot to talk about on your side of the channel. Guys, I want to thank you for listening to another episode of the Snapchat as we come up on a year of recording the series. We have new villains in Marvel Snap, season pass cards, should they be good, and most underrated cards at every cost. We're going to be breaking that all down on Alex's side. And as always, guys, thanks for watching, and until the next one, happy snapping.